Look, we're coming to an end. We've got an exciting final keynote speech, and I think we've got a beautiful video put together by SBS. We went out there and SBS asked some of you what it means for you when we say advancing multicultural Australia. And this is to set the scene for the next keynote plenary. So off we go.
Advancing multicultural Australia for me means
an inclusive society whereby, regardless of where you come from, who you believe in, what you look like, or what your sexual orientation is, everyone is included.
Inclusivity for every single person in Australia from different faiths, different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and making sure that they have the same opportunities as any other Australian.
A future where all Australians, irrespective of backgrounds, can find a place where they belong and where it is inclusive. And it is a place where a future is secured, where we find an element of who we are, but living in a collective society.
It could mean leveraging off the multicultural Australia that is such an asset to the country. I'll give you a simple example. In the economic sense, if you have a t-shirt shop that sells very similar t-shirts, you're not going to sell a lot of them. But when you have a variety of them, you could sell a lot.
to include people from intersectional background to celebrate the colors of this great big nation.
When I think about the future of multicultural Australia, what gives me hope is
freedom of faith, inclusive global workforce, and a peaceful society.
Knowing that there are incredible young people who are stepping up to be leaders, not just for tomorrow, but also just for today.
What gives me strength is knowing how powerful and rich my culture is already, and to also know that there's other cultures out there in Australia that share the same power and share the same richness as my culture does, you know, being a First Nations person. And also just to think that Australia has always been a multicultural society, you know, gives me immense hope.
Knowing that we have elders who are empowered and strengthened by our ancestors and willing to support young people like myself into the future.
Thank you very much.
SBS and FECCA.
Thank you, Thank you, SBS, for your generous support, not only for working so hard on wonderful content for us, but also for providing all the logistical support behind the scenes and also your wonderful talent to the FECCA Conference. I'd like to introduce the chair of the next session, and he will introduce the keynote speakers. Please welcome David Hua, the Director of Audio and Language Content at SBS.
Good pick-up of that chair coming from the chair of the next session. Thank you so much for being here. It's wonderful to actually reconvene in this room. We've literally eliminated the walls and have come back together as a group, which is fantastic. Normally towards the end of a conference, you see the herd kind of thinning a little bit, but it's so great to be in such a full room, even though I know so many of you are anxious to be getting back to your various homes across the country. It's such a great opportunity to be together. I'm David Hua. I'm the Director of SBS Radio and Languages, and it is my absolute privilege to be chairing or hosting this next session. And I must say, and I do confess that when getting briefed about this session, that I was actually quietly told by a few people that the best sessions during FECCA have been the ones where the chair actually hasn't said very much at all. So I was going to, you know, with my tail between my legs, wander off to the side and just go, well, what's my job here to be done? Great, fine. But it is actually very much because we want the panel to be talking and we also want you to be participating very, very actively. Before I begin, of course, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we meet. Trước khi mình bắt đầu, tôi muốn mời mọi người để ý là trước khi mình đi họp, có thể hối buổi cảm nhận cho hãy Warren Jerry Woiwurrung lands of the Kulin Nation, Kulin Guotia. I've just shared with you a language which I actually think that only 3 people in the world understand in terms of the acknowledgement of country. It's my Vietnamese heritage coming from my mother, my Cantonese and Mandarin heritage coming from my father's side, and of course a bit of English thrown in, having grown up in Australia. I say that only 3 people actually understand it because the other 2 live in Europe. They are my brother and my sister. And I share that with you because when it comes to the 3 of us getting together and we speak our own mongrel tongue, that is when I actually feel as though I most definitely belong in the heart and in the soul. And that's because I can be absolutely myself. It does not mean that we get along with each other, I promise you that. But it certainly means that I can be myself. And that is part of belonging and part of what Multicultural Australia might actually look like. To hear a little bit more about that, I would love to introduce up onto the stage a killer panel who will be talking about advancing Multicultural Australia, which has been broadly the theme of the whole conference, of course. But beyond just talking about this topic, it is really your opportunity, and I really do encourage you to use Slido as well and to put up your hand and ask questions of this killer panel who I'm just about to introduce you to about any topic that might have come up over the last few days or anything else that's on your mind with regards to Multicultural Australia. I think it's such a rich area of discussion, and sometimes we as participants might lack the knowledge, the history or the experience to use the types of arguments that might actually be successful in advancing Multicultural Australia, but this panel here will absolutely help us to be able to do that. Slido, it's actually not that hard. If you go to your phone and open up a browser, you go to slido.com, and then if it asks you for a password, it is FECCA 2022, and then you can ask a question anonymously as well. And just in terms of a forward promote, Mary is exiting as the chair, so she will have no filters on, and you will be able to ask her anything and she will just tell it like it is. Not that she doesn't already, of course. Mary, please join us on the stage. Mary, of course, needs no introduction. She's been our host throughout FECCA, and she's the outgoing chair of FECCA. She's a professional board director. She's deputy chairperson of Health Performance Council. She's a member of the Northern Adelaide Local Health Network. She's also a board member of Catherine House, a member of the National Aged Care Alliance, and chair and non-executive director of Power Community Limited. This is the point at which I really feel like I'm an underachiever, but please welcome Mary. Vivian Nguyen, and I did pronounce that correctly, I'm so proud of myself, is the chair, of course, of the Victorian Multicultural Commission. Viv arrived in Australia as a 12-year-old refugee and has used that experience to become a passionate advocate for genuine community engagement and cultural diversity. For over 25 years, she has been a leader in corporate, community and government settings, applying her business knowledge and technical expertise to work with community organisations to advance their social objectives. She's been an executive at AusChoice, at AMP and ANZ, and she's held a number of different leadership positions. In 2020, this is, the underachiever part 2. 2022, Viv was inducted into the Victorian Honour Roll for advocating for women's leadership and supporting young Vietnamese people, and in 2023 she was awarded the Australian Centenary Medal, and in 2021 she was awarded the Australian Order in the AM Division for advancing Multicultural Victoria. Please welcome Viv. Next, I'd really like to invite Maha Abdul, who also has an OAM. Some of you have already heard from Maha. She's actually well known to FECCA. She's spoken previously at this conference in Hobart and in an earlier session yesterday. And she has spent over 3 decades working to help give Muslim women safety and assurance in difficult circumstances. She's moved to Australia in 1970 from Lebanon at the age of 12, where her father established the first mosque in Lakemba. And it's very interesting to see the transition in Lakemba. If you ever visit a place like, or go to the Lakemba Nights Market during Ramadan, you'll know what I mean. Maha joined the Muslim Women's Association a few years after it was founded in 1983, and she's now the CEO. She advocates for legislation across state, international and national governments, and that includes legislation around head coverings. Please welcome Maha. And finally, we have Faisal Farah. He's the Communications and Stakeholder Engagement Lead at the Scanlon Foundation. And Farah leads, he has a Bachelor of Communications in Public Relations and was most recently an electoral officer for a federal Member of Parliament. He is a FECCA Advisory Committee member and previously has been an Advisory Committee member for the North Melbourne Football Club. We won't hold that against him. He is a committee member for the Afro-Australian Student Association and was briefly the Editor-in-Chief at Watu Australia as well. Now, I am going to move down there so that I don't feel as though I'm talking down to the panel at all, but I do want to start with Faisal. You work at the Scanlon Foundation, and for those of us who might be unfamiliar with the Scanlon Foundation, which does excellent research work, can you tell us a little bit about that, the Social Cohesion report, and also what does the data and what do the trends actually tell us about Australia as it is, multicultural Australia, and how does Australia kind of see itself too?
Hello, can you guys hear me? I just want to first say thank you for everyone for staying back. I know many of you guys are interstate and probably have flights after this. I want to begin by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands in which we meet. I think listening today to the speeches at the Next Gen with the Uluru Statement of the Heart, I thought that was such a moving... So I just really wanted to thank everybody that was part of that conversation for enlightening me. Your question about the Scanlon Foundation, when I first started, I didn't know what it was either. But it is a philanthropic organisation, a private family philanthropic organisation started by Peter Scanlon about 20 years ago. And it focuses on social cohesion by providing grants to community groups or initiatives that support community, migrant community groups, kind of settle and integrate and kind of establish a life in Australia. Our research institute is what focuses on researching social cohesion, and we produce a yearly, I don't write it, but we produce a yearly study which tracks Australians' attitudes, social attitudes towards migration, life in Australia, their experiences of, what life is like in Australia. So that is conducted, was just recently changed but by Professor Andrew Marcus from Monash University. And basically what this, I think looking at this last year of the study tells us that Australians are still overwhelmingly supportive of multiculturalism. And I think that's sometimes hard to fathom and sometimes easy to feel like that's not the case, but when about 86% of people still say that they support multiculturalism or multiculturalism has been good for Australia, I think that shows a wonderful strength in our society. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I think that tells us that across a broad spectrum of our society, people are still committed to multiculturalism, and I think that is, something unique about Australia. Having said that, I think, and I know we might touch on this later, 60% of people still, in our most recent survey, said that racism was a big problem in Australia. So many might say that that is a problem what has changed in 1 year to another, but I think it's in a weird way a positive thing that more people are acknowledging the scourge and the disgusting nature of racism in our society, and willing to actually speak up or acknowledge that it's a problem. So on that level, it's kind of a double-edged sword. It's a problem that more people are saying that racism's an issue, but I think the cat's out of the bag in a sense, and I think it's now time for us to take it seriously.
Thanks, Faisal. And as well as Slido, you can just put up your hand. There is a roving microphone that will come and get you if you've got any questions. Mary, I want to go to you next. Thank you so much for hosting us over the last few days. You've already... FECCA this year has sold out, as I understand it, on Twitter with 950 delegates, which is phenomenal. Who do you think isn't in this room, and who needs to be here in order to help advance multicultural Australia?
Yeah, very good question. And it is about, in some ways, we're always challenged because I often feel we're talking to our friends that converted, and that is something that we could see as a criticism. I actually take it as a strength. I think it's really important that we are together and that we can speak as essentially as one within a range of ideas, because we're not all the same and we don't all agree on everything. So I think the important thing is not so much who's in the room today, but what it is that we take from here and where we go with these messages and what we do with it. I think the other important thing is that it's not about robust debate in here alone. So it's not like we bring 500 of our friends and then go and find 500 people that don't agree with us and bring us to... So I really think this is an opportunity for us to affirm with each other that we're still on the right track, that we're okay, and that we do challenge each other as well. So there are many things that I think that we need to move away from. So, I mean, I do think that we need to be very conscious to not fall into a victimhood, because I think that does not play well for us all the time. So I'd like to, for instance, to lift that debate and to have that conversation beyond this room, that we come from a position of strength, and it's that sort of whole sociological perspective of assets rather than deficits. I think that's, if we bounce off that, and certainly every session I heard, people were critical of conditions that were negative, but people that were very positive and capable. So I like to see us as very powerful people that are just getting together and kind of having a bit of a yarn and sorting stuff out from a position of strength. And then from here, we take each other's strength and we use it to move on. So I don't know, do I want Peter Dutton to be sitting here? Probably not. I just can't. It takes up too much energy. And I'm not sure that it's... I'm not sure how easy it is to shift people like that in this type of environment. It takes a different environment.
Thanks. I think the point around agency is a really, really good one. I was at the Les Murray UNHCR for Australia award yesterday, and the winner, Daniel Malbassa, actually told a story. He's a lawyer who does employment law, and he was actually representing a worker for unfair dismissal, and he was successful in getting this person's job back. And this person was actually an Anglo-Australian. And then after the win in court, they went out and had a coffee and then started to unload about how migrants were taking jobs and how migrants were on social security. But little did he actually know he was actually sitting across from someone who actually saved his job. So that point around agency and victimhood is a really, really good one. Thank you, Mary. Maha, I want to go to you next. When the Me Too movement was happening a couple of years ago, I noticed something very interesting happening on Chinese social media, on WeChat. And the hashtag wasn't hashtag Me Too, but it was actually a hashtag of rice and rabbit. And the characters as well as the graphics of them. And rice and rabbit in Chinese, it actually sounds phonetically like mei tou or me too. And that was one of the ways in which people in China in particular, women, were able to actually have a conversation about the Me Too movement without it being picked up by the censors immediately. It did get picked up eventually, but there was a lot of conversation that happened beforehand. I wonder, in terms of the work that you do at the Muslim Women's Association, how that played out amongst our Muslim sisters, and did Muslim women in Australia feel included in the Me Too movement?
Thank you for asking me that question, because at that time, but before I do that, I'd like to welcome you in my own language. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be with you all, and acknowledging the traditional owners and the souls that are here with us today. I was at the 1800 Respect Advisory Board, and we were talking exactly about that, because the Me Too movement did one thing. He brought out the issue to the surface, but there was not enough support out there for the women that wanted to talk about it. It was always about the, inverted comma, the white women in this elite space. It actually left out a lot of the women who were being abused that we've been dealing with for the last 40 years. And we've been saying this for a long, long time. But it doesn't mean that we can't come together. And we've had that conversation about that. There'll always be someone that will bring out an issue such as, abuse or violence against women and all of this, and use a hashtag. For me, I feel a hashtag is something that sometimes makes you very lazy, and you just start type all these hashtags, and then team like ours who are working literally around the clock 24/7 working with multicultural women, yes, we do work with Muslim women, but in that time, our service providing women from all cultures and all faiths, it was so hard on the ground, trying to catch up with the conversation, bringing out the issues, dealing with that. But we didn't want to sound like a whingers, because at that time, the space was not safe enough for women of other cultures and other faiths to start talking about it, because already you have that negative connotation in regards to your culture or to your faith. So we didn't want to take that away from the actual issue that was happening. So what we were doing, we were having private conversations around the space. And we did have some very symbols, because remember, after that, there was COVID. Not long after that. So by the time it got to the community, COVID hit. So we were having a lot of other conversations to give women power and agency to access support and services without putting a label on it that will blame a whole culture. See, there's a big issue here, is that if we're going to talk about violence against women, we're talking about aspect of abuse and all of that, when a person of a faith or culture like Arab or Islam, Muslims, automatically, like the whole community gets blamed for it, right? It is not, and working backwards is hard. So what we do now, clearly I agree with what Mary was saying, we work from an asset-based approach. We're not victims, and we do not want to be victims, but we are working with survivors of violence, and that's the conversation we were having. You're not victims, and don't be afraid to speak about it, whether it's at work, whether it's in the shops, whether it was in a public space, on public transport, whether it was in the home. So there's so much intersectionalities and nuances that we have to deal with. But I feel hopeful, and I'm very emotional right now, because I feel like as I'm sitting here and my heart and my soul is so connecting with around this room. I feel like I never thought in my lifetime I'd be sitting up here talking about advancing Australia from an asset-based, from like a factor, you know?
Thank you. Well-deserved round of applause there. Vivian, you always hold yourself with such serenity and calmness.
Do I? You haven't worked with the Victorian Multicultural Commission Director. You might like to join us.
You certainly appear that way. You might be like one of those swans that's, serene on the surface of the water, but underneath the water it's paddling for its life to stay afloat. I do want to thank you very much as well for participating in the SBS Vietnamese interview just before, and I heard you speak Vietnamese, and I heard you say a few nasty things about me behind my back before she realised that I could understand what she was saying, of course. And there are a lot of comedic moments that I think everybody in this room, or a lot of people in this room, might have in relation to that. You do keep calm, but what has really gotten you rankled over the last couple of years? They can't have been easy years for you. And do you actually think it's worth getting angry about things anymore in a culture that is increasingly about outrage?
Thank you, David. I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are gathered here and pay my respect to the elders past and present. I think we really need to give ourselves a big round of applause. Final session for the conference. Being here and having absorbed so much, we really ought to give ourselves a round of applause. Thank you, FECCA, the incoming and the outgoing chair and the CEO for bringing us together. It is an amazing effort. For me, sitting here, this time next year, Australia will have, 50 years of the multicultural Australia policy. I am sure the wise heads there, and there are many in this room here today, Eddie McAuliffe being one of them, and many others, younger heads that are in this room today. And I've heard you from the youth session, the youth session earlier on today. Many of you are wanting to take stage, and many of you are totally capable of doing that. I think if we can reflect on what we have achieved, or lack thereof, in the last 50 years, and really put us in a strong position to engage, to collaborate, and to work together for what is going to be a very strong vision for Australia in the next 50 years. And then, the next 5, the next 10, the next 50 years. I think there is a lot we can do there. The last couple of years in my role as with the Victorian Multicultural Commission, we have seen a lot of frustration of the COVID pandemic and the like. But what I really genuinely see is the inspiration I draw and the energy I draw from meeting community members, working alongside them, supporting them, listening to what they are experiencing, and then advocating that back to the Victorian government and connecting. To me, that is actually worth gold. It really is worth gold. And I know many of you are wondering why, Boy and I and other commissioners of the VMC are and about all the time, where we find the time, when we find the energy. We actually find that in meeting you and in attending and celebrating and sharing those activities and events and functions and cultures and traditions and all the things that matter so much for you and with you. And that's what really makes Victoria strong. And that's where I draw the energy from. And even if I get really frustrated with the bureaucrats, and I do, and there are some in the room, I'm sure. This is Chatham House rule, of course. But that, in comparison, is really nothing to what we see, the way the community comes together, the way we just really advance forward, even before federal policies, before state policies, before any government fundings were provided to us. We did it in space. And that's what I believe is what makes Victoria and Australia so strong. And we need to really harness a lot of that to look forward to what Australia will be like in 50 years' time.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to see that we've got some really interesting questions coming up from Slido. I've got a ton of questions myself as well that I will rely on. But the top-rated question, and if you don't want to ask a question, you can always just like a question as well. Someone from the audience asks, I'm a person from a diverse background myself. Overwhelmingly, the conversation and resources is around discrimination against us, whereas discrimination amongst ourselves is a big problem as well, such as those from other backgrounds, LGBTIQA+. Why don't we do more here? What are the conversations, Viv, maybe to continue with yourself, around the tensions that might exist between community groups and within community groups itself, and how do you navigate that space?
One of the points that many of community leaders in this room here, and there are 60% of the Victorians participating in this conference, right? So let's just give ourselves another round of applause, Victorians. is that we do, it is really important, and we have legislation here in Victoria to promote cultural diversity, promote harmony, promote a whole range of things. So there are rights and there are responsibilities. We are totally free to promote our culture and share our culture and celebration, and we do that a lot. What we also need to do is to make sure that we also understand others' cultures and traditions, understand what is important to others as well, because with that, then we create understanding and appreciation and respect. In the VMC, we are working on that, and we are trying to do that a lot through conversations, through dialogue, one-on-one, group settings, and the like. And we've also just done the Community Leadership in Action program, and that's one of the core purposes of it: connecting, creating contacts and connections, and making sure that we understand ourselves and each other and the systems around us, so we can collaborate and advocate for what is fundamentally the same issues across different cultures and backgrounds.
Faisal, I'll ask you to maybe contribute to that a little bit in terms of being, a younger person on this panel. How do you think people can respectfully disagree with their elders if they might actually come from a culture where, the elders' word is gospel?
I have a history of going up against elders, and I think I don't mind it now. I'm actually so used to it. I think the thing, if we're talking about the future of multiculturalism in the broader sense as well, I think it's kind of a little bit simplistic if we pretend like there isn't conflict between groups, within families, I think within groups as well. So how we deal with those kind of conflicts in some sense is actually a testament to our society and our character of our nation. But, I think in terms of from an intergenerational perspective, I've witnessed many, many occasions where there's a real disagreement within a community group about its direction, and there are people that don't want to let go of power. And I've seen young people just eventually just give up and feel like it's actually not worth it anymore and just completely stop. That's, I think, something that is a threat to multiculturalism in the future, especially if there's not a generational renewal in positions of leadership, and also fresh perspectives on how we can deal with conflict. Because I think when we find that sweet spot is when, we're going to be a lot stronger. But at the moment, I think, many young people are getting a pretty raw deal at the moment, and they're pretty much left out of most positions of leadership, and probably only get to speak about fringe issues that is, fringe by the sense of, Australia's political system and our debate at the moment. I don't think young people really featured in this election at all. But I think as we move forward, I do think, younger people definitely have an experience of internet beefs that, they can talk about, and really give perspective on how we deal with social conflict amongst groups. That would be I've seen many, 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 many beefs and many, many fights, but I think at the end of the day, it is, it does take a little bit of understanding that these things are natural, in my opinion.
Maha, on that point, if a woman came into the Muslim Women's Association and said to you that she was same-sex attracted, how would you advise her?
Well, we work from a human rights framework, and we don't discriminate against anybody. And we put a very different lens from a faith perspective, because we're not serving her from a theological perspective. So we have served, and on our database, we've served transgender people with children, and it was one of the most rewarding process we all went through. We all learned, and the person, they said that when they accessed mainstream services, they did not get the respect that they got from us. Because the first thing we said to them, we work from the intersectional perspective of a person that represents to us. We don't come out and ask, what is your sexual preference? But with transgender, the person wanted to tell us because they had multi-layers of issues and they had children. So we were working with each child individually, and when we were advocating on behalf of the person, we were walking beside that person. Never one day did we make that person feel insecure or that there's something wrong with them, right? But yet we cannot go out there and advertise it, right? That doesn't mean that we don't serve it, because we don't engage in this theological debate about religion and culture and all of this. From a human rights, former-informed healing framework is what we work with, and everyone's welcome. We have a no wrong door policy. So when we work around that, I feel we've approved, you know.
Thanks. I've got a great question from the audience that's been voted up to the top. And would you say it's necessary/important to have not just SBS but representatives from other media networks to be a part of FECCA discussions about advancing multicultural Australia? I'm not going to ask myself that because there's a conflict of interest. I might throw that one to Mary.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I in fact partly addressed it because I did an interview earlier today with Nels Cosmos, which is the Greek paper. Thankfully, they allowed me to do it in English. I've attempted to speak Greek in the last 2 days, which was tricky. So I think it's a very valid point. There's two layers to this. One is that SBS is here because they're a partner in this conference. They've been able to contribute to partly subsidise a sponsorship, and that sponsorship has actually allowed us to bring many young people under scholarships to the conference that would otherwise not be here. I think 150 young people were sponsored into the conference through the very generous sponsorship of SBS. And also our other sponsors who are in the room that we've referred to earlier. So that's one function, and it's not the only function, but that it partly explains their presence here. The other is our engagement with communications and media, and I can say that because of the way our funding is organised, we don't actually have discrete funding for communications. So it's inhibited or it's placed some lack of capacity over the organisation to engage into ethnic media and into the media generally that we ought to be able to do. So it is a challenge, I think, moving forward. We have solved it in the past through various means, which I won't explain because they were a bit tricky. But we have been able to resource it by basically skimming off the top of some grants and basically investing in a comms person. But we do need to go back. It's a very legitimate point. I have spoken to Mohammed about the importance of doing that. The last 2 years we were so wrapped up with COVID we could barely see past our noses to do much else other than that. And we had a very strong internal communications capacity that was very focused on getting messages out to community. We did use as much media as possible, and we did use SBS for the COVID communications as well. Government did a lot of that. So they got advice for us, but government managed a lot of the COVID communications. So look, I think the way forward is not the way that we've functioned over the last 2 years, but the last 2 years has been unique.
Thanks, and I really want to throw in a massive thank you for anyone who's participated in SBS interviews over the last couple of days as well. I know we have been hustling and grabbing people and making measured assessments and sensible assessments, I hope, on the languages that you might speak and the communities that you might represent as well. But that's exactly what SBS's job is, to represent, be of the community and for the community. I've got another question here about mainstream organisations and governments ask community leaders, bicultural workers, BIPOC people, individuals with lived experience to inform our programs, to support community engagement and to share expertise, lived experience for free, ! This is not okay. Do we agree with that as a panel? Maha, I thought I'd go to you first.
I've been one of those people that would travel all the way to Canberra and talk about my life and talk about this, and then in time you think, well, hang on, you know, this is our experiences, and just like everything else, I think it should be at a cost. But we need to work together, and we need to be a little bit more savvy and a little bit more aware of what we bring to the table, because without us, they can't plan. And it's not it's a partnership approach. It shouldn't be them and us. We should be approaching in a very inclusive, safe, trusted space where there are programs and developed strategies, and we're aware of the outcome that's going to become. I mean, I've done some work with DSS and it's been amazing, but it's one in many. And I think there's so much that we can learn from together as we move forward in providing that. It's advice, it's consultation. So I think, and it is intellectual property. So, and supporting communities. And we're seeing new emerging communities, they'll probably fall into that sort of category. We need to be able to provide capacity building and support into that space where we can advocate together about inclusive way of telling your story, but at the same time receiving something reciprocated in what way that you can. Yeah.
Isn't it? I always find it funny that how things are seen within an economic lens. So, for example, one of the things I really like about the direction of the new government is that childcare policy is now being seen as a productivity issue, and it's actually a value add to the Australian economy. I think, you know, the support of bicultural workers needs to be in that discussion as well. It's actually a real shame that it's only seen within a cultural lens or a multicultural thing, or it's like a very small issue when people are doing an incredible job like translating and bringing people together, you know, advocating, always trying to make sure that their community, you know, is brought to the table and doing a bunch of really on-the-ground services. I think on that level, it needs to be seen as a economic thing. It's an actual value add to our economy. Like I find it weird that, you know, on one hand, if it's anything to do with coal, it's economic, it drives jobs. And if it's anything to do with people, it probably doesn't. And I think, you know, if we're to move forward, I don't know why it's making that sound, but if we are to move forward, we have to start to see culture and, you know, tapping into our cultural, you know, strengths as real benefits to the broader Australian economy. So I completely agree. Like, it's time to, you know, that we move forward and take that seriously.
We're getting great questions coming in from Slido, but if anyone wants to raise their hand, I'm happy to run a microphone down to the floor to take questions from the floor as well. There are a few questions coming in related to youth and young people. Just a quick show of hands. How many people in this room are below the age of 40? And look, I think everybody's laughing because my idea of young is 40. Okay, below 30, I'm getting a request from the floor. It's a pretty good representation. Don't know what you're complaining about, put your hands down. No, but of course the future lies in young people, and it was really inspiring to be a part of that stream of conversation that happened earlier today. Young people claim that they are a minority in this conference. How will FECCA work to make the conference more accessible for young people and other intersectional lived experiences? Probably a question for you, Mary.
Look, I agree, and we have tried. So one of the aspects of these sorts of events is that they're costly, and we need to invent ways that are engaging and work for young people that don't have dollars attached to it, so that their participation can be increased. And I think that we need to hear from them how that works. Because, I mean, the other thing I've thought about, and this is where you're correct, this is where I say whatever I want, is that this conference is great. I mean, it works and it's fantastic, and we've tried to tweak it so that it's fun and that it's entertaining and it's not just whatever. But this is an old potentially an old model of how we communicate with each other, and we need to come up with new ways of doing that. And so these types of conferences may need to change form, and as we change form, their connectivity will be easier with people that find this type of attendance difficult. I mean, a lot of people in this room are here because they're paid to be here. If you're not paid and you're actually working in a coffee shop trying to make $1 so you can, pay your rent, you're not going to be in this room. So they're the sorts of conversations we need to have so that we can increase the breadth and spread, and the range of people in the room. So that's the first thing. I acknowledge that, and I'm not entirely sure how to fix it. So I think that if I said I know how to fix it, that wouldn't be the truth. The second thing, I think there's a willingness, and we have got a very young CEO, so maybe he can work it out. So the next thing is I want to acknowledge, and this is where my hypocrisy will come in a little bit, but I think that a point was made earlier. I think FECCA will suffer in the next 5 to 6 years if we ourselves don't break the mould. So we need to ensure, and I've said this yesterday to the board of FECCA, that we ourselves need to be more diverse. We can't go out there and preach diversity if we fail to have that diversity on our own board. We are going to be, after this election that's occurred, 3 out of 9, what are the numbers? 3 out of 9, I think, women only, and not enough of other representation. It's just not good enough. That's partly a function of the Federation, where we get members up from our member states, but that needs to change. We've all said it, we haven't done it. So I think that's a valid criticism of us, and I think we need to take it on board. I think especially, and I say this is where I think my hypocrisy, well, not hypocrisy, because I'm here for a particular reason, and I was drawn into FECCA by Pino, as I remind him endlessly. But I think the Greek and Italian, the success of the Greek and Italian communities, is entirely self-evident. And the fact that the Greek and Italian communities have held on to the realms of FECCA for too long is something that we actually actively need to address. There are people out there that are more than competent. We need to bring them through our organisations and make them leaders at the state level so that then they could become leaders at the Commonwealth level. We need to let it go.
All right, I am a wannabe radio presenter, so I am actually very, very anxious about when it hits the top of the clock and when it's news time and the program gets cut off. So I'm conscious that we've only got a few minutes left before FECCA ends officially, but I do have a brave gentleman here who wants to ask a question. If you'd like to stand up, please.
Thank you, David. My name is Ramesh Kumar. I work at Good Shepherd. I'm just a follow-up question or a comment on that. One thing is to get young people into the room to listen. The other thing is get them to talk and we listen. And that should happen more. I've heard comments all along with young people that there were only two panels and one totally dedicated to young people, but there were young people on other panels. So that's something we need to consider if we need to get, because advancing multicultural Australia rests in the hands of the young people.
Look, indeed it does, and with the Muslim Women's Association, Maha, you have extended that to services for young people as well. The science actually says that if you really want to affect a child's life, you invest in them a lot in the first 2,000 days or so. Are we getting it all wrong here by having these conversations and not just throwing everything that we have at really young kids?
Look, I think you just said that what you're saying is right. We are listening, and we do listen, and listening tentatively with young people, not for young people. And part of our succession planning in the last decade at Muslim Women Association, that's become Muslim Women Australia, we have young people here with us who are leading the way, but leading the way with our support, not leading the way on their own, and they're leaders of the today. It's hard to invest. It's hard to let go, but it is so relieving once you see them going out doing things that you think, wow, this is amazing. It is such a magical moment when you see young people leading the way. In our organisation now, we've got young women who are leading in their own right. They do develop strategy. They do all of that. They come to our old one. I'm one of the older one now, is that they come for advice. And we listen, not just when they're talking, we listen when they're not saying anything. I think that's where the magic happens, is that exactly but you need to interact with them. And interacting with them, not necessarily in a diversified way, not in just sitting in an office. We go to retreats. We sit under the trees and we talk about things that has nothing to do with leadership. So I think what we're saying is that we need to do a lot more of going out with young people to listen with our hearts and connect so that we allow them to make mistakes.
Thanks.
Yeah, can I just add on that point? I think just like everything, we do need to build trust with each other, and the young people build that trust with the older person or people, and the same applies with us as well. We need to make that strategic move to support young people and gradually transition ourselves out of those positions of influence and the connections that we have as well, so that we set them up for success. I think that has to be deliberate, and that has to be planned, and it needs collaboration and cooperation from both sides.
Although my younger sister will object to me being a young person, I think, honestly, for this kind of conference, make it cheaper. Like, I understand where the costs come from. And I completely and appreciate why it is at a particular level, but I mean, I don't know the average worker that's going to pay that. And the other thing is, you know, when I put it on my Instagram, I said, hey guys, I'm going to do this thing. I don't know why, but I'm going to do it. And I had a lot of people that say, I want to watch it. I really want to watch it. Where can I watch it? Is there a live stream? All that kind of stuff. And I had to tell them, I think I'll send you photos. And the reason why is I didn't think it was accessible. So, I think, let's be completely honest. I think most people are priced out. The most young people in this kind of forum, anyway.
Faisal, I might just stick with you, and just to kind of wrap this session as well, in terms of what young people can contribute. Big issue right now, of course, is climate change. What can multicultural Australians and young people in particular kind of bring to this conversation that will be useful?
I think just before this, I was reflecting on this way that Australian society is changing, as I was asked to do. And one of the things that really occurred to me is that our globe is changing, our climate is changing, our economies are rapidly changing, but I felt like, most of the leaders in the new environmental movements, the new clean energy movement, are still white, and we're not at that discussion, which I think is a real shame, because that's where the world is going. And I think we should really break down those doors and make sure that, those people that are at the top of those conversations look like us as well. And the reason why I say that is a friend of mine was telling me a story about he's an engineer, and he was going to apply for a job, and in the application, the engineering firm asked a lot of questions whether he was Pacifica, and he didn't understand why. He's like, oh, why all these questions about being Pacifica? And he said they told him that the Pacific Island nations and the peoples have a wonderful tradition on preserving the land, a connection to land, and sustainable practices. And it's actually something that engineering firm wanted to tap into the work that it did. I think that tells a wonderful story about how culture can impact, and be best utilized, and the strengths of our communities can be utilized in the new challenges that we're facing as a country. I think that is where we should start to be thinking, instead of just thinking, small time in a sense. So that's what I believe we should be heading.
And look, I might just have one final question, and this is about allyship. Maybe one more. One final question over here. Oh, this one up there. It's two. Okay, very quickly. Here you go.
Thank you, David. My name is Dor. I work for Settlement Services International. We talked about young people already, but there is another category that we haven't seen through the conference, and I'm wondering how we can be able to get that other group. These are the grassroots community leaders. The conference today focused on professional ability of multicultural community. What about the communities we represent? Where are they? How do we get them here?
Thank you very much. My name is Elijah Ball. I'm the Deputy Chair of ECCQ Queensland. So I was one of those young people 7 years ago given an opportunity by ECCQ to be on the board when I was in my 20s. So I think it's also important for young people to aspire and maybe challenge the leadership of those elders who might stick around. My question is direct to Vip and Mary. We often talk about multiculturalism, and often in front of the converted. As I go around the country, there are people who feel that multiculturalism is a threat instead of it being a strength. So what message do you give to us here as we go out and talk about multiculturalism to convert those who are in the conversation who look at multiculturalism as a threat rather than a strength?
Touching on that very first point. Mary, did you want to go first on that one?
It's a very deep sociological question. I think the risk is if we create a multiculturalism narrative that is about others, and the definition of external coming in as if that then changes the greater in a way that's negative. If we change that narrative and it becomes a conversation that is about the uniqueness of individuals that come together, and that is one of unity. I know I'm using sort of words that we use all the time, but what they fear is that that we will change things and that change will not benefit them. It's what we saw in America. So if we can stop the conversation about others and make it that all of us lift all of us, and that is humanity, then I think that those fears begin to be addressed. It is actually about the distribution of resources and what they feel to be the development of an underclass that is a white underclass, and that somehow we want to take over something. So it's got to be a very careful discourse that doesn't incite fear. The reality is that sometimes we fear them. The truth is that they actually fear us. So we need to get rid of that element in the conversation.
I might end on reflections on that point from each of you.
I would just take it as a very personal, bring it down to the individual. This is me, this is you, we are Australian, I'm living here. And what you know about me and what I know about you is what? We live under the same set of rules. We are working, we are having cappuccinos, we're having like those things that are so common. When I get confronted with conversations like that, I just go straight, just you and I. We don't have to worry about all the other bigger pictures. It's just here. We are having this conversation here and now. Are we able to talk to each other? Are we able to hold a meaningful conversation? And if we are, the rest is insignificant. That's how I approach it.
Thank you. I mean, I always have that conversation with my grandchildren, and I tell them stories about myself. In the early 70s, it was just after the White Australia policy where I could not speak Arabic. I was not allowed to speak Arabic in public or on public transport. And how did we become? When Multicultural Australia became Multiculturalism, I remember the first thing my father said, we are educated, we're all together. And I share my story always with my grandchildren, and my grandson the other said to me, Tata, Grandma, you always talk about change, but you never name to shame people. And that's what I think, I was thinking about advancing Australia and going forward, and I think we need to name the issues, to change them, never to blame anyone about your fault, my fault. We all have a role to play here, and I feel I have much more responsibility. If I recognise someone's uncomfortable with me, I have a responsibility to make them feel comfortable, but not to step all over me. But I think, and I wholeheartedly believe, our last 40, 50 years of experience, in 40 years, not the last 10 years, of multiculturalism, let's bring that back in, but with succession planning, so that when we are together, intra-racism does not reoccur. And I really do wholeheartedly believe there's hope, and hope in action can only happen when we put that sincerity in our hearts. It has to come in from that sincere intention when we walk out of here, is that I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to say hello, but from a sincere place, not from saying, oh, I don't like that person. We go out there, I will go out there, hopefully, and I always do that. Those that know me, I will always welcome. I always welcome to my heart. Sometimes, and I don't sometimes shake hands, but it's not about the physical connection. And it's about connecting back to our Uluru statement. It's bringing the Indigenous people back with us, or not back with us, but inside that, when we walk together with an avalanche of peace, in such a creative, innovative way, people will, by no choice of their own, but they'll come and walk with us. So we'll walk together on that journey, inshallah. Thank you.
It's hard to top that one, Faisal, but your final reflections?
I was hoping she would be the last one. It's hard to top that. I think, honestly, the thing that will... I think multiculturalism, we're pretty comfortable to say now that it's broadly considered a virtue of our society. I think we've got to that stage, and it's a wonderful position to be in. The next stage will be protecting it, building upon it, and then I think the key part is continuing to stay curious about each other, about each other's cultures, our histories. I think if we lose that curiosity is when we lose that great strength. So in my opinion, you should still be curious about your neighbours, what they eat, what they do, how they live their lives, what they used to do back in in their home countries. If we continue at least on a neighbourhood level on that front, I think, it's going to be, a really strong position for us in the future.
Thank you. Will you please thank the panellists? Look, to end on, I just wanted to share with you a quick observation from myself. When I arrived here on Wednesday night, hadn't been to the Sofitel before, and, just kind of trying to suss out who's who in the zoo, and, a bit hesitant to connect with other people. But when everyone started to get issued with their lanyards, it was great to be able to just start to really open up and talk to people at the lifts, in the halls, in the hotel lobby and the like. It just felt as though when you're wearing the the FECCA lanyard, you have this fellowship with other people where you can have a conversation that you're not starting from ground zero, you're building on ideas that have already been, and conversations that have already been had, which is so enlivening to me. As you take off your lanyards and leave though, and there is one more speech from the outgoing chair, her reflections on her tenureship, continue to feel that fellowship, connect with each other, be it online or in face-to-face, mask to mask as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be a part of this panel, and have a great afternoon.
I get to have the final say, which is perfect. Okay, look, I'm going to be really brief, so I'm not going to hold you for very long at all. I'm going to say that we did things, we said things, we completed some things, and there's much to do. So I have enjoyed my just over 4.5 years. I will stay on in a different role to contribute in whatever way I can. And can I invite you all to continue to connect with FECCA, and we will certainly reach out to you and beyond. That's it in terms of my reflection. I think I've spoken so much that even you must have, you must be a bit tired of me talking right now. But I have promised you a FECCA Conference communique, and I will say that 900 people gathered in the last 2 days, attendees from all over Australia, represented by a diverse range of cultures, ages, professions and experiences. And it represented, I think, a slice of Australia. And I mean that it's a slice of Australia. Sometimes I think we should stop using terms like multicultural, because maybe that's the problem. Maybe if we just say that we're all kind of Australia and this is what it is, we can just get on with it. Anyway, maybe if we deal with racism, we can stop trying to label what it is we're trying to deal with. Okay, so together we agreed that FECCA and all of us will work towards a truly inclusive and equitable society that will recognise justice for First Nations peoples. We are proud to support the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and we are committed to building a support across to our First Nations brothers and sisters and everybody else over there to ally with them to achieve that. That we will reform Australia's federal multicultural framework. That's the second point. To urgently build our future which is one of equality, where equality thrives, where we all thrive. We call on all multicultural organisations and communities to help us lead this process. That's number 2. Number 3 is that multicultural communities have the answers. That we have the answers in the room. Give us a seat at the table. Working in partnership with government and other private sector providers will help us to create genuine, inclusive policies and practices. Can I say that the just launched Australian Multicultural Health Collaboration is a great case in point, where we intend to work in a space with everyone with us, achieving a very important thing, which is equality and health outcomes. Equity and health outcomes. I always get confused. Robust communication and engagement with all people in Australia, which includes young people, regardless of what their background is. FECCA needs to reach out and do better in that space. We need a robust communications plan, and we need to push the government into developing an anti-racism campaign. The current migration system is causing unnecessary harm and vulnerability across our communities. It needs urgent reform at all levels to ensure a system that is transparent, fair and humane for all who want to call Australia home. FECCA will continue to work in that space. We need to recognise the expertise and leadership that refugees, asylum seekers and migrants bring to this country, and that bilingual and bicultural workers have been the backbone of the last 2 years, especially in the caring sectors, health, ageing and social care, and in the coffee machines, which is also, I think, the caring sector. We need to make sure that our workers are recognised and rewarded for their contribution, looking back and also looking forward. And I think on a closing note, the Minister committed to a data evidence-based move by the Commonwealth Government to ensure that both the Commonwealth Government and the state governments collect data. The reality is if we don't count it, it doesn't exist. So the reason they weren't counting is because they didn't want it to exist, and the reason they didn't count Aboriginal people was for the same reason. They didn't want them to exist. So the commitment of the Commonwealth Government to build on called data is critical. I now need to update you on the AGM outcomes. Before I do that, I'd like to acknowledge my board. And can you stand up if you're in the room, please? Alton Budd from Queensland, Andrew Ng from ACT, Dr. Edwin Lords from Northern Territory, Eddie Micallef. Is there anyone in the room? Have they all abandoned me? Oh, truly. Jill Morgan. Kevin's gone. Thank you, Jill. Maker, is Maker in the room? No, all right. Can you just tell them I thank them? Marion Lau's away. Mary Angela, she's gone as well. Oh, she's here. No, here she is. Thank you. There's Mary. Miriam Cocking. Don't know if she's in the room, but she was definitely here. Peter Dukas has had to leave. Rita. Wakas Durrani and Hina Durrani. Please stand up. Thank you very much. And Suresh, who I think has left. But I think I noticed, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I noticed Suresh was talking to everybody, so you all know who he is. So thank you to the previous board. And I can now inform the group that we have had an AGM on Wednesday and elected some new office bearers. I'd like to announce that Mr. Peter Dukas and Edwin Joseph, Mr. Peter Dukas is now the Senior Deputy Chair with Jill Morgan. I think Peter's gone, but Jill is here. Emmanuel Valayorio, who I think is here. There he is. Emmanuel, you're the new Treasurer. And Dr. Edwin Joseph, who I think is left, is the Secretary. It gives me great honour to now announce that we have a new Chair of FECCA. His name is Carlo Carli. I assume he's in the room. Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Carlo introduce himself, but can I say congratulations. You will enjoy yourself, you will be challenged, and you will be exhausted by the end of it.
Thank you, Mary. This will probably be the briefest speech I've ever made in my life, so you'll all be able to leave pretty quickly. And I just, well, first I should acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal people present. I take it everyone is ready to leave, so I just have the briefest introductions. Carlo Carli, I have spent most of my life in working in community, in health policy, in public policy, in the political system, as a political representative. I'm very challenged and I'm very excited to be taking over as chair with Mary and collaborating, continuing with Mary and a new board. We have in the communique an enormous task, but we have an incredible platform. This conference has been a platform for change. We have seen a series of senior ministers come and speak to us and commit themselves to a really collaborative period. So I am so excited of what we can accomplish. I'm excited in our diversity, but more importantly, I'm excited in the unity that we've shown in the last couple of days. We need to be unified. One of the greatest threats to multiculturalism is othering. We heard it at the end, the closing of the door, trying to entice Australians to close the door to new immigrants. We are a country that has allowed millions of people to resettle. We have resettled 800,000 refugees since 1948. Our generosity needs to continue, and the lesson of our generosity is really within the Uluru Declaration from the Heart, which is that they have invited us to collaborate in the new vision of this nation. Our generosity needs to be shared with people who will come in the future. We must never, ever, ever close the door to people. Thank you very much. And yes, I will be in touch. Thank you.
What have we done? Sorry.
Stay there. Yeah. Stay there. Mary, on behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank you for your service to FECCA over the past 4.5 years, the longest serving chair of FECCA and only the second female chair of FECCA in FECCA's 42-year history. So a big round of applause for Mary. Thank you for your friendship, for your counsel, for your wisdom, and for guiding me and putting up with my very annoying outbursts, dealing with very challenging conditions, but together we have achieved something great. You should be proud of yourself, Mary, and on behalf of everyone here in the room, I'd like to say thank you for your service. And I'll look forward to stop calling you my boss and a friend. Thank you. Thanks.
Of course, I'll always be the boss.
No, we haven't finished yet. Do you need to say something? Huh? Do you need to say something?
No.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah,
thank you.
Done.
Beautiful. I'd like to just call up on stage the CEO of ECCV, which we haven't heard from yet. It's been an absolute pleasure to be working with Emiliano Zucchi from ECCV. He's been wonderful to work with. Conferences like this don't happen without having people on the ground who are supporting you every step of the way. So I'd love to introduce Emiliano to say a few words, and we're so close to finishing. Bear with us.
Thank you so much, Mo. Good afternoon. I'd like to commence by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. I would also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal people who might be here today, and also Aboriginal people that might also have a migrant background as well as an Aboriginal background. I think that Melbourne, or Naarm, as it's known in the local Aboriginal language, Naarm, I think that's something that we can all take back home, has been starved for attention for a few years. But wow, did they get it with the FECCA Conference in the last 2 days. It's been an absolute pleasure, a huge success, and I think we all ought to be very proud of this conference. Look, I'll take home a lot of ideas to reflect upon over the next few days and weeks and months, but there were two in particular that I feel confident to comment on immediately. One is that we will walk with the traditional custodians. We will fight with them until voice, treaty, and truth are ingrained in our history as a prerequisite for a truly united and equitable society. The second message is that was loud and clear. Multicultural Australia will not be taken for granted. Often, I've been to a lot of conferences. I think this is my 5th or 6th FECCA conference. I usually present. Slightly different role this time. But often there's an element of preaching to the converted in conferences like this. I didn't feel that this time. I felt a call to action. So I think it's fair to say that FECCA, the ECCV, and the Ethnic Communities Council all around Australia have got a responsibility to roll up their sleeves and get back to work, because we need to make sure that this is a representative society. Finally, I think it's very, very important to thank the FECCA staff and the ECCV staff. It would not have been possible without them. There was a huge, huge, huge amount of work. Most staff and my staff have worked day and night, literally day and night, to pull this conference together. It's been, you'll agree, a fantastic achievement. I would like to thank Mo. We've developed a great relationship in the last few months. It's been great working with you, Mo. Thank you so much. And what can I say? I'm looking forward to the next FECCA conference. Thank you.
Look, just final thank yous, and I'll let you go. To all the speakers and presenters, thank you. To all the chairs and facilitators, thank you so much for keeping to time and making sure everyone catches up. To all those who submitted abstracts and presented as a poster presentation, thank you so much. To all of our sponsors, look, we couldn't do this without you. You know, we've talked about, we've given over 150 scholarships to young people, community members, and we've allocated more than $20,000 for travel assistance. So, you know, I hear your criticism, but the only reason we can keep the prices low are because of our sponsors. Those who actually do conferences know that a 2-day conference is easily over $1,000. And, you know, we will do everything we can to try and keep the price down, and we would love to hear your feedback on how we can do this. Thank you. I have to acknowledge all of our sponsors because none of this would be possible without them. 2M Language Services and Polaron as our major sponsors, thank you. The Lote Agency as our multicultural research partner. Jobs Bank as our inclusive employment partner. SSI as our conference dinner partner. Lexigo as our cold communications partner. My Access as the gold sponsor. Language Loop and the Commonwealth Bank as our silver sponsor. And Translations as our bronze sponsor. A special thanks to the Victorian State Government for your generous support for even making this even a possibility in the first place. Thank you to Vic Health for your community partnership with FECCA and enabling a lot of the young people here today to be here from Victoria. Thank you to the City of Melbourne for the Welcome Reception sponsorship. Thank you to Cornerstone Alliance for all the wonderful graphic design and everything that you see around here, that's them. You can say thank you to them. And finally, thank you to SBS for being a wonderful media partner year after year with us. There was a question around, you know, how can we, you know, invite more media to be part of the FECCA conference. I'm actually very proud to have been able to allocate a number of media passes for local community organizations to be here to cover the conference. You've seen many small ethnic media that's been done, and thank you for SBS for allowing us to do that. You guys are the exclusive media partner. You could have said no, but obviously you realize that it is very important for local media to be here, so thank you. Please give them a round of applause. I'd like to thank all the FECCA members for making the Federation work. We talked a lot about how can people be involved, but you guys need to put your hands up and become a member of our members. So for example, ECCV, and put your hand up for nomination to become on the board and so on and so forth. That's the only way we're going to change the makeup of the Federation. I think everyone is in agreement, but if I can encourage you to join as members in your local Ethnic Communities Council, please do so. To the FECCA Organising Committee, Mary Patetsos, Eddie Micallef, Jill Morgan, Emiliano, thank you for all your hard work and for guiding us through very challenging times. To all my staff and ECCV staff who worked on this conference day and night, thank you, all of you. I'm not going to name you because everyone worked really hard, but especially the conference working group, Lauren Stark, Anusha Khan, Ramel Lalata, who else did we have? From ECCV we had from ACCV we had Victoria and Emiliano. Thank you so much for your hard work. Thank you to ASN Events. Thank you to Cara, Tim, Lauren, Rebecca, and everyone who helped us put this wonderful conference together. It's been an absolute pleasure working with you guys. To all the artists and entertainers, thank you so much. And thank you to all the FECCA board for your support. There will be a quick survey that you will be sent. We would love to hear your feedback. This is how we improve the future conferences. So we really value your feedback. So thank you so much. I'm going to leave you with one last video, just a highlight reel of the past 3 days. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next year.